Hey guys, Chris here from Carolot Farm. Today I want to fill you in on all sorts of things here in the garden, primarily weeding. We've had some rain, which is fantastic, and so I have a full day of working in the garden and I want to tell you all about it. If you're like me and you spend great lengths of time out in your garden, there are a few really important things that we need to be sure we always do. 1, apply sunscreen. 2, reapply sunscreen if you're out for hours at a time. Hats, you always want to have a hat, whether it's a baseball cap or a broader brimmed sun hat of some kind. And sun shirts. I'm a really big proponent of sun shirts. I need to get new ones though, because these have been washed and worn so often over the last year that they definitely are probably losing some of their sun-proof ability. So again, do your best to stay on top of those things, because for our health, if we want to keep gardening for any long length of time, we have to take care of ourselves. So now on to a few more, let's call them more practical tips when it comes to gardening. My favorite tool to garden with is truly my hand. I am a big weed puller, and so the ground has to be soft enough so I can sufficiently do that. And when the ground gets hard, I just have to wait for a nice day like today after we've had a good soaking rain. The next tool though, aside from my hand that I use most often, is just a little hand cultivator or a little claw type tool. That helps to really get the roots and all, but primarily I do use my hands. The larger tools to me, I don't know, I'm just a little more of a perfectionist, and I want to make sure that I actually remove said weed and not just move it all about so that it might potentially reroot. There's a lot of different approaches one can take, and it's just finding what works for you and your garden. Earlier this week, the ground was artificially softened by hose so that I could work on weeding my sweet potato bed. I have my trellis line up. I'm going to try to get them to grow up, not out this year. Wish me luck with that. But because I was out here for a long time weeding, there was so much grass. I did a lot of sitting on a bucket. I find sitting and reaching a little is easier than kneeling, but sometimes I do kneel on the ground. You could use a pad or a folded up towel. And I also sometimes just sit on the ground myself, kind of Indian style, and pick and weed around me. So mixing it up and being in different positions will help save your body, your knees, your back, your shoulders. But again, finding, whoa, almost fell over. Finding what works for you is first and foremost. So a few days ago, like I was telling you, I spent several hours over 2 different days back to back weeding my sweet potatoes. And I did most of that sitting on a bucket. Well, I'm not gonna lie, I actually ended up with like a bruised rear end. So sitting on anything that's hard for any long length of time can be troublesome. So today, before I do something similar, I'm embarking upon weeding my okra. You can barely see okra here. I promise there's a nice dense row, and there's a row just here beside it. So this is where my focus is going to be today. And then, oh my goodness, can you even see the tomatoes? We have 28 tomatoes and like, I don't know, 7 to 9 eggplants. They have so much grass you can barely see them. That will be weeding for another day. But today I am going to be sitting on a bucket, but I'm going to try something different. So let me show you that. And I think it will help a little. So I had this bright idea, I think it was overnight, of sitting on a padded bucket. We have a couple of these around the farm, and to make it even better, I'm gonna double pad it with a nice thick towel, because like I was telling you, I will likely be sitting here weeding my okra for quite some time. So enough talking about all the logistics and tips that I have to share based on my personal experience here in the garden. Now I'm gonna get to work. I'll show you a few clips here and there, but weeding is kind of boring. I'm just gonna be picking and pulling, but I'll show you as I progressively move through the steps. Now that I'm all ready, I'm on my nice padded bucket. One more thing, I have a discard bucket. If possible, when I'm weeding, and I know there's gonna be a lot of weeding to be done, I like to go ahead and just put everything into a bucket, and then I can dump my bucket into a wheelbarrow or some larger container. And that just kind of keeps me from having to come back and clean up my mess after the fact. So that's another little tip before I get started. Here's another look at just how dense the grass is around my okra plants. It is quite something. Not ideal. I find it helpful to pull smaller clumps versus a larger handful. When it comes to gardening and weeding, less can be more sometimes. You don't want to overdo anything because you don't want to wind up with tendinitis and then be out of commission. But another tip I would have for you would be alternating hands. I am right-handed, but I have switched over to my left hand, and I will continue to alternate back and forth throughout the weeding session so as not to overuse one versus the other. Also, be on the lookout for all sorts of garden critters. We've got spiders. Sometimes you'll get into an ant's nest. So just be mindful. You don't want to get a bite of any kind out here. Sometimes when I'm out here in the garden, and perhaps some of you have the same issue, you have little garden helpers that want nothing more than to be glued to your side on a hot, sticky, humid day like today. And it's sweet, but sometimes they do make things a little more difficult. So here, I'm maybe almost a quarter of the way done with all of the okra. So I'm almost halfway down this one line, this one bed, and it's looking pretty good. I do also like to have a little bucket of water handy just so I can rinse my hands every so often. But things are looking pretty good here on this first line of okra. One row fully weeded, one more to go. A few days ago, I did come out here and I did a little quick weeding just around the base of the plants so that they wouldn't be totally choked out. And so now, like I've shown you, it's time to come back and reclaim the whiter bed. When possible, I also like to weed with the sun to my back. That way it's not on my face and my neck. So today, weeding the okra is perfect because by and large, the sun is behind me. Even though it's cloudy, the sun is still out and about. As I'm out here weeding, I'm also beginning to see where the Japanese beetles are beginning to chew quite heartily on our plants. So we will want to dust these probably this afternoon. First section of the second row down. I don't know, another hour or so probably of weeding left to go. As I work to finish up my weeding endeavors here, I have two things I want to mention. One, my cushioned bucket seat with the towel has been an improvement. And two, when you're weeding your okra such as this or other crops that can tend to get large with broad leaf coverage, you don't always have to be as meticulous because once these plants do start to really shoot up and send those leaves out, they'll begin to shade out the weeds underneath, which means they won't grow as rapidly, which is fantastic. So after a really thorough weeding such as this, I shouldn't have to do a whole lot more for this particular crop, which is a really great thing. My friend Frankie is still close in the garden. I'm gonna now swap hats. Whenever I am not talking to you with my head down weeding, I have been wearing my larger, broad brim sun hat, my straw hat. So I'm gonna swap those out now and finish up this last short stretch. As I move farther down the row, I'm flipping my cardboard, which is covering the pathway, over to allow me to gain more access. And you can see what a good job at deterring the weeds the cardboard has done. Having just finished weeding these two beds of okra, I found that a lot of the plants were in fact planted very, very close together. When I planted the seeds earlier in the spring, they were home harvested seeds that we gathered last fall, and I wasn't sure how many of them would germinate. So I did intentionally plant them somewhat thick. But because some of the plants were so close together, I have transplanted 7 or 8 of them from the row behind me into this bottommost row in the garden. Here is a closer look at 3 of those transplants. They should bounce back. I've had a lot of luck with transplants before, but here you can see how droopy they are compared to the one that has not been disturbed. But all in all, most transplants, if you are as gentle as can be and you don't disturb too much of the root structure, they should bounce back. They might be a little on the stunted side, but time will tell. These 3 okra plants on the far right at the end of my bed were those transplants. 2.5 weeks later, they look great. You can see there's some other transplants a little farther down that are still quite small but living. And all in all, the okra is looking pretty good. Thank you so much for joining me today here in the garden. Weeding is a huge part of gardening. I'm sure it's not just me, but I'm happy to say the sweet potatoes look fantastic, and that okra that I got into today is looking so much better. I feel just such a relief knowing that the plants have all been saved and rescued from the grass that was taking over their beds. Now they can just grow and mature and start to shade out any grass or weeds that might have a thought of popping up, which is great. Check back, we'll have lots of updates, and we hope to see you in the future. Bye guys.